Assalamu alaikum. Please mark your calendars. Starting this Friday, March 1st, we will be replacing the 6 p.m. Eastern Akida class, Al-Wala Wal-Bara class, with a special program for the month of Ramadan. Please join Ustada lailanasheeba for the first 7 days of Ramadan with a preparation course. Allow her to walk you every day after that with the fiqh of fasting. Don't forget, mark your calendars, and we're streaming it right here on Sunnah Followers.
Her story is an example as to how we should be balanced in our love and hate. In the beginning of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mission, she was a staunch enemy to Islam, the daughter-in-law of one of the worst enemies of Islam. But later, after the conquest of Mecca, she converted and became an infamous heroine of Islam. She participated in battles. Join Ustada lailanasheeba as she details the story of Hakim radiyallahu anhu. In alhamdulillah, wa salat wa salam ala wa rasulullah. Welcome to our series of the heroines of Islam. And this series has become very popular because not only are you learning about the female companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but you're also learning the history of Islam. You're learning about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a man, and you're also learning about the male companions too. And tonight's story is going to be very, very informative because this is one of my favorite heroines of Islam. And I know I say that a lot, but I really, really admire this one. Not only is she a famous heroine, but also her brother became a famous companion as well too. And their story is a story that goes hand in hand with what we're learning in our Wala Wal-Bara class. It's all about striking that balance as Muslims. It's all about learning how to balance our love, learning how to balance our hate, because a person that we hate today may become someone that we have to love tomorrow, and vice versa. Well, in the beginning of this, and in the beginning of Islam, in the beginning of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's prophethood, this female heroine was an enemy to the Muslims. She, her father, her brother, her whole family, basically, except, well, not all of them, because she had some relatives who converted. But in the beginning, she and her family were very hostile towards the Muslims. And the name of the heroine that I'm going to do today, she made up for all that hostility later. After her conversion to Islam, she made up for all that hostility, as did her husband and many of her other family members who converted. And like many of these companions, she was also related to the Prophet because they all came from the same tribe, the Quraysh. You know, she was of the Qurayshi tribe, you know, so they were all related. And that means she was related to many of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam too. And her name is Hakim. Hakim. And I like her story, not only because her story is an example as to how a person can be bad and then totally turn their life around, but also her story is another story of another woman that puts to rest the misconceptions that many people have about women in Islam. There is no need for feminism. What you call that feminists, this feminist movement, because Islam liberated us. You'll see, guys, that the story of Hakim is something, because, like I tell you all the time, this was the 6th century. These were the medieval dark ages, and any female child that was left to live had to be trained in warfare. This was the custom of the era. Any women that they kept alive, they trained them to defend themselves, because if a woman could not defend herself, she became basically a slave or a prostitute or a bedmate to men. She had no rights. Islam came about and gave women the rights. Well, let's go into the story of Hakim, and you can see exactly what I mean. So let me take everything down, because I know you guys like to take screenshots of everything. So, and by the way, please support this dawah effort, guys. We are desperately in need of donations to cover our website expenses. And you can go to PayPal me/SunnahFollowers. If you go to the link there, the address at the top there, PayPal me/SunnahFollowers, please donate, and donate generously, because the first will be here after tomorrow. And we have to come up with that $2,000 all over again for next month's expenses. So let me share my screen to everyone. Okay. And okay, I'm going to let you guys see the snow for a minute while I go on Zoom and do a couple of things on Zoom. That's one. Also, while I'm on here. Okay, oops, wrong one. It said I have 2 of these open, and I don't know why, but it says it's 2. Okay, let me share the Zoom, people. All right, and now let me share you guys that are here watching me stream. Uh-oh, didn't open it up. Hold on for a second, I didn't open it up. And I don't know why it's not opened. Hold on. Oh, because that's Zoom. Okay, I got confused because my streaming program looks just like looks like the Zoom room. Move this down. Okay, here we go. Everybody should be able to see my PowerPoint. And let's make it larger. All right, so tonight we're going to do the story of Hakim radiallahu anha. And her story is going to be very, very, very interesting, because like I said, it's going to put to rest more misconceptions that you hear a lot of the famous speakers have about women in Islam. Now, Hakim, let's go over her lineage. And what does the word lineage mean? Lineage means her family. Her family. Lineage does not mean race. It means family, who your father, mother, brothers, and sisters are. Hakim, she was the daughter of Harith ibn Hisham, who belonged to the Makhzum tribe of the Quraysh. So this is what I was saying. She was one of the clans of the Quraysh. So they were all related. She was related to the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to Umar, to Uthman, Abu Bakr. All of them were from the same tribe, the Quraysh. And guess who her mother was? Her mother was the sister of Khalid bin Walid. So that shows that she was also related to Salama, because Salama was the first cousin of Khalid bin Walid. They were all related. Hakim, she was married to Ikrama, And who was Ikrama? Everyone should recognize his name. Ikrama was the son of Abu Jahal. And who was Abu Jahal? He was the enemy of Islam, one of the biggest leaders amongst the Quraysh, who created so much hardship for the Muslims. So the family of Abu Jahal was known for their opposition to Islam. And Hakim was a part of that family. She was married to Ikrama. Ikrama was her cousin. So she married her cousin, her first cousin. And just like her cousin and husband Ikrama, she was opposed to Islam tooth and nail. She participated on the side of the Quraysh in the Battle of Uhud. She was with them when they fought against the Muslims. Her and Hind and the other women, they came out on the battlefield beating drums, singing songs, promising the men sexual relations. You know, not her, but the women that were not married were promising sexual favors to the men, you know, if they defeated the Muslims on the battlefield. And by the way, I AI generate this picture so you guys can see the type of drum. This is a type of drum that the women used back then. It's like a tambourine, but it didn't have the bells on the edges. And they would beat this on the battlefield, okay, to encourage the men. And also during this battle, remember the leader who made a decisive turn and who the victor was Khalid bin Walid. Khalid bin Walid was the main general of the right flank of the Quraysh, and the left flank was her husband Ikrima, who was the son of Abu Jahal. They were the best warriors. Khalid bin Walid was the best and Ikrima the second best. And the Quraysh, as you guys know, inflicted heavy losses on the Muslims and felt that they had avenged themselves for being defeated at Badr. But that was not the end of the conflict, as we well know. So, she was an enemy to Islam in the beginning of it with her husband and her father-in-law, and she helped fight against the Muslims, you know, during the Battle of Uhud. 9 years after the migration, remember the Prophet ﷺ returned back to Mecca. This became known as the conquest of Mecca. He came back to Mecca with thousands of his companions. And when the Quraysh saw the Muslims approaching them, they decided to leave the way open for them because they knew that the Prophet had given instructions to his companions to not, you know, fight unless necessary. But Hakim's husband, Ikrima, he went against what the Quraysh decided and tried to block the Muslims from advancing into Mecca. Khalid bin Walid, who had now converted to Islam, Khalid bin Walid converted to Islam not long after his cousin Salama married the Prophet. So Khalid bin Walid was now on the side with the Muslims, so that left Ikrima as the best general of the Quraysh. Khalid bin Walid knew the fighting tactics of Ikrima. He met and defeated Ikrima and his army in a small engagement. Some of Ikrima's men were killed, and the ones that survived ran away. Ikrima himself ran away. So the Prophet ﷺ entered into Mecca, and he gave pardon and amnesty to all the Quraysh who entered into the Kaaba or who stayed in their homes. And also remember, right before this event, Abu Sufyan had also converted to Islam. So Abu Sufyan was now a Muslim too. So the Prophet said, I don't want to fight any of you. He said, for those of you who will stay in your homes or go to the Kaaba or stay in the house of Abu Sufyan, I grant you pardon and amnesty. But there were a few people who he refused to give amnesty to because they were such enemies to the Muslims. And of course, Ikrimah, the son of Abu Jahl, who was the husband of Hakim, he was one of the ones that the Prophet said, I'm not going to forgive him. I'm not going to give amnesty to him. If you see him, kill him. And when Ikrimah heard that, he left Mecca. He disguised himself. He sneaked out of Mecca and went to Yemen to escape the wrath of the Muslims. But when he left, his wife, Hakim, she went to the camp of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And with her was Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan. And there were also 10 other Qurayshi women. They had decided to convert to Islam. So they wanted to give their pledge of allegiance to the Prophet. And also at the camp was Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She was there with some of her relatives from the Abdul Muttalib clan. And when Hakim and Hind and the other 10 women approached the Prophet, Hind took a veil and hid her face with it because she was ashamed of what she had done. And remember, she was the one that had Hamza killed. And they say she ate his liver and mutilated his body. So now that she had converted to Islam, she was ashamed of her actions. So she hid her face, and approached the Prophet. And when she approached the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she said, "O Prophet of Allah, praise be to Allah, who has made the religion of Islam and chosen it for himself." She said, "I beg of you, out of the bonds of kinship, to treat me well." She said, "I am now a woman who believes in Allah, and I affirm the truth of your mission." And that's when she removed the hijab from her face, which is more proof that a woman doesn't have to cover her face. And she said, "I am Hind, the daughter of Utbah, O Messenger of Allah." And she lowered her eyes because she was so shamed. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told her, "There's no need to be ashamed, Hind." He said, "Welcome." And this is when he told her in the authentic hadith, which can be found in Sahih Bukhari, "Don't you know, Hind, that Islam purifies you of whatever sins or whatever bad actions you did before it?" So he was letting Hind know that there was no need for her to be afraid to face him, because now that she was Muslim, Allah had forgiven her of all the evil she had done. And after telling her that, that's when Hind said, "O Prophet of Allah, there is not a house on earth. There was not a house on earth that I did not want to destroy more than your house before Islam." She said, "Now that I am a Muslim, there is no house on earth that I so dearly wish to honor and raise in glory other than yours." And that's when the Prophet smiled and said, "Don't worry, don't worry, Hind. Islam wipes away whatever evil came before it." And after Hind spoke, that's when Hakim came forward. And she too professed her faith in Islam. And she said, "O Prophet of Allah, my husband, Ikrimah, he has ran away from you. He ran away to Yemen out of fear that you will kill him." She said, "Please grant him security, and Allah will grant you security." So here you can see Hakim, she had converted, embraced Islam, was given her pledge of allegiance to the Prophet, but she also was looking out for her husband. She wanted the prophet to also pardon her husband. The prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Don't worry, Hakim, he is secure." And as soon as he said that, Hakim left to go find her husband. And she left and took with her a Greek slave. It was a man who was from Greece who was her slave. They had traveled a far distance from Mecca. And when they were far from Mecca, that's when this slave tried to seduce Hakim. See, Hakim had just converted to Islam. She did not know the rules of mahramship. She did not know that now that she was a Muslim, a woman cannot travel nor be alone with a man who is not a mahram, because she didn't know. She had just gave her shahada, and her first concern was, I got to go find my husband, bring him back here, get him to convert. So not knowing, she took her slave, her male slave, with her. And look what happens. This is why Allah says that we cannot be with a man who is not a mahram, because as soon as she was out of the city limits of Mecca, he tried to rape her. But she managed to push him off of her. And she continued on her journey. And when she arrived at a village, she sought help. She told the men inside the village that this slave of hers had tried to attack her sexually. So the Arabs took this Greek slave, they tied him up and put him in a prison. And so Hakim continued her journey to find her husband by herself. So she traveled by herself to the coast of the Red Sea in the region of Tihama. And that's where she found her husband, Ikrama. He was making an attempt to travel across the ocean, to Yemen. And he was negotiating with to get on a ship with a Muslim seaman. The Muslim seaman had told him, look, convert to Islam and I will take you to Yemen. And that's when Ikrima said, how can I convert? And the man said, just simply say that you testify that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his messenger, and that will purify you. Ikrima had told the man, look, this is the reason why I'm leaving. I'm leaving to get away from this. And that's when Hakim came up to him. And she said, oh, my cousin, I have come to you from the most generous of men, the most righteous of men, the best of men. I have come to you from Muhammad ibn Abdullah. And I have asked him for amnesty for you. And he has granted it. She said, so don't destroy yourself. There's no need for you to run away to Yemen. You can come back home to Mecca. He has agreed to forgive you. And that's when her husband said, you've talked to him? She said, yes, I've spoken to him and he has given you amnesty. So let's go back home to Mecca. And then she told him how she was traveling with a Greek slave, and the Greek slave had tried to rape her. When Ikrama heard this, he went directly to the village where the Greek slave was being held, and he killed him. He killed him for trying to rape his wife. Okay? So they continued. Hakim and her husband Ikrama, they continued on their way back to Mecca. And when they went to rest, Ikrama wanted to sleep with her because she was his wife, but she told him no. She said, no, I'm a Muslim now. Now, she didn't know the rules of mahram, but she did know because of the agreement that the prophet had made in Medina, that any believing woman, when Allah sent the verses down saying a Muslim woman cannot be married to a non-Muslim man. So she knew that. So she told Ikramah, I can't have sexual relations with you. She said, because I am a Muslim woman and you are a non-believer. Again, her point was to bring him back to Mecca and get him to convert to Islam. Okay? Ikramah was taken aback. He said, wait a minute. There's no way that I can live with you without your sleeping with me. He said, I love you. And that's when she said, that's why I want you to come back with me. I want you to come back with me and meet with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as soon as Ikramah entered into Mecca, the prophet got the news and he told his companions, he said, Ikramah, the son of Abu Jahl, he will come and enter and he will come to you as a believer and as a refugee. He said, do not insult his father. Do not talk bad about what he did before Islam. He said, and do not insult his father, because speaking bad about the dead causes grief to the living. And just as the prophet said, because Allah had already manifested to the prophet that Ikramah would convert, Ikramah and his wife came to where the prophet was sitting. The prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam greeted him. And that's when Ikramah said, oh Muhammad, my wife Hakim has told me that you've given me amnesty. The prophet said, yes, that's true. You are safe. Ikramah said, what are you inviting me to? And that's when the prophet said, I invite you to testify that there is no God but Allah, and that I am the servant of Allah and his messenger. And I am inviting you to establish the prayer and to pay the charity tax and to carry out all the other obligations of Islam. And that's when Ikramah said, by Allah, you have only called to what is true and good, and you have only commanded that we do what is good. You lived amongst us before you began your mission as a prophet, and you were the most trustworthy of all of us in speech and the most righteous of all of us in action. And that's when Ikramah stretched forth his hands and he said, I testify that there is no God but Allah, and that you, Muhammad, are his servant and messenger. And that's when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him to say, I call upon Allah and those present here to witness that I am a Muslim who is a mujahid and also given amnesty. And that's when Ikramah repeated what he said. And Ikramah said, I ask you to ask Allah to forgive me for all the bad things I did against you and whatever bad things I said in your absence. And that's when the prophet raised his hands and made dua. He said, oh Allah, forgive Ikramah of all the hostility he directed against me, and forgive him from all the expeditions in which he fought against me. Forgive him of whatever he has said or done in my presence or absence to dishonor me. And that's when Ikramah became so happy. So here you can see, guys, how two enemies, Hakim, just like Abu Sufyan and Hind, they were enemies to Islam. But now here all of them had converted, and Allah forgives everything that comes before Islam. All the bad things that they said and did against the Prophet and Allah were forgiven. Subhanallah. Ikramah, he said, by Allah, O Prophet of Allah, I promise that whatever I have spent standing in the way of Allah, I will spend twice as much fighting in his way. And whatever battles I fought against Allah, I will fight twice as many and twice as hard in his way. And right after that, guys, Ikramah became one of the best Muslims. That's why we don't speak badly about any of these companions. We don't speak badly about him, nor Abu Sufyan, nor Hind, nor Hakim, nor Muawiyah, because whatever they did before Islam was forgiven by Allah. Ikramah, he participated in all the battles that the Muslims fought after that. In fact, he was known as one of the bravest horsemen and the best on the battlefield after Khalid. He was also a great worshiper of Allah. He used to spend a lot of time in the mosque reading the Quran because he knew how to read. He was one of the few companions that was educated. Often he would be found with the mushaf on his face. He would say, "The book of my Lord, the words of my Lord," and he would cry from the fear of Allah because of all the bad things he did before. We got Muslims today, people who convert to Islam today, and they spend all the rest of their life talking about their conversion stories. That's why I tell you, we don't have time for that. Who cares about your conversion story? Everybody got a sad sob story. The question is, what have you done since you've converted to Islam? After the Prophet Muhammad died, Abu Bakr became the caliphate, and Ikramah, as my cousin Mukhtar has mentioned him in many of his classes, Ikramah fought in the apostasy wars. Later, he went to Syria and fought against the Romans. And when he went to Syria, Hakim, his wife, went with him. It was during the Battle of Yarmouk that Ikramah lost his life. He plunged into the battlefield, trying to make up for all the wrong he did before Islam. The Muslims were under heavy attack by the Romans, but Ikramah didn't care. He went in deep into their ranks. Khalid bin Walid rushed up to him and said, "Hey, cousin, don't do this. Because if you die, it'll be a big blow for us because you're one of the best warriors." Ikramah said, "Look, Khalid, let me carry on." He said, "You had the privilege of being with the Prophet of Allah and fighting with him. As for me, my father, we were among his worst enemies." He said, "Let me atone for what I did in the past, cousin." He said, "I fought against the Prophet on many occasions. You think I'm going to run away from these Romans?" He said, "That'll never happen." And then Ikramah called out to the Muslims. He said, "Who will pledge to fight to the death with me in the name of Allah?" 400 Muslims volunteered, including Al-Harith ibn Hisham, who was Hakim's brother, and also Ayash ibn Abu Rubayah. Remember, they all were big enemies against the Prophet. They all fought against the Prophet. But now that they were Muslims, they were willing to put it all on the line for the sake of Allah. So they plunged into the battle and they fought heroically without the leadership of Khalid bin Walid. Their daring attack paved the way, which led to a victory. And that's how the Muslims were able to take Syria from the Romans. When the battle was over, the bodies of 3 wounded fighters were sprawled on the battleground. And those 3 fighters were Al-Harith ibn Hisham, Hakim's brother, Ayash ibn Abu Rubayah, and Ikramah. Al-Harith called for some water to drink. As it was being brought to him, Ayash looked at him, and Harith said, "Give it to him instead." By the time they got the water to Ayash, he had died. And when they returned to Al-Harith and Ikramah, they found that they had died too. So here we can see, guys, and my cousin Mukhtar spoke about this. They all died right after each other. These were three brothers, three cousins, who in the beginning of Islam were Islam's greatest enemies. And now all three of them died together as three of Islam's greatest heroines. Subhanallah, the valor that those companions had. They weren't emotional like you Muslims are today. They were men and women of action, not men and women of talk. They put it all on the line for the sake of Allah. How many of us can say we would do the same? The companions, when they found all three of their bodies, they made dua asking Allah to be pleased with these three great men. They prayed asking Allah to let them be amongst those who will drink from the spring of El Qatar in paradise. Ameen, subhanallah. When Hakim heard about the death of her husband, she stayed in Syria. She was very sad. Another great warrior named Khalid ibn Sa'id, he sent her a proposal of marriage after her waiting period. After she stayed in Syria during her waiting period after her husband's murder, Khalid bin Sa'id sent her a proposal of marriage. She accepted the proposal, but it came with a condition. She said, I will marry you, but the marriage should be held after the war against the Romans is over. Khalid ibn Sa'id said, well, I don't think I'll be able to survive this battle. He said, I'm going to fight to the death. He said, I may not make it through this battle, Hakim. So Hakim gave her consent, and the marriage celebration went in effect. And here we get to see the heroism of this great woman. Here we get to put to rest again the misconceptions that Muslim women are supposed to be invisible, that Muslim women are not supposed to be seen, that Muslim women are not supposed to be heard, that Muslim women are nothing but meat and child bearers, and that's it. Well, Hakim married Khalid bin Sa'id, and they consummated their marriage in the military camp at Marj al-Safar, which is outside Damascus. The day after they consummated their marriage, Khalid bin Sa'id went to fight, and he was killed. When he was murdered, Hakim woke up to find her tent surrounded by the Romans, still dressed in her bridal clothing. Hakim showed them just what an Arab woman could do, because these were Romans. You know, back in those days, you know, whenever a battle, whenever an army won a battle, the women became their slaves, and they would, you know, divide them up to sex them or enslave them or even prostitute them. That's what the Romans would do. Well, they got a shock with this one. They surrounded her tent. And when she realized that she was surrounded by a bunch of non-believers, what did she do? She yelled out, I am a woman of the tent. And she plucked one of the poles of the tents from the ground, and she came outside swinging it, and she struck to death all the Roman soldiers who were trying to enter into the camp. She alone by herself killed 7 Roman soldiers with her tent pole. near a bridge that to this day has been named the Bridge of Hakim, which is near the city of Damascus. That shocked the Romans. Remember, this was the caliphate of Abu Bakr. Islam was spreading throughout Syria. Many of those men hadn't encountered Arabic women. Oh, what a shock. What a shock. They could wield a sword, wield a pole just as good as a man could. And the resulting confusion, Hakim escaped, and she ended up safely amongst the Muslim army that had returned back to camp. Now, again, like I told you, they were all related because they were different clans of the Quraysh. She was not only a cousin of the Prophet Muhammad, but she was also a cousin of Umar. When Umar, because right after this, guys, this is when Abu Bakr had died and Umar had taken up as the caliph. Umar was now the caliph over the Muslims. When Umar heard what had happened, how she had married Khalid bin Sa'id, and they had not even been married one night, Umar was so impressed with her heroism. He was so impressed with the fact that she killed 9 Roman soldiers with the poles of the tent, still wearing her bridal clothing. And when he saw her, because she made it back to Medina, when she arrived in Medina, Umar saw that she was sad, and she was one of his cousins. So he was talking to her, and to calm her, he said, Hakim, why don't you marry me? Just marry me. And she agreed. So Umar and Hakim were married during the 3rd year of his caliphate, and she bore him a daughter whose name was Fatima. Now, as you all know, Umar died, was martyred during his caliphate. As in regards to her, she died 10 years later. Okay. Hakim died, it is said, it's estimated, because everything is estimated because nobody knows for sure, because Allah kept it this way so these companions wouldn't be worshipped. Okay. But it is believed that she died 10 years after Umar. And she didn't remarry. Some say that she did, but the most consensus say that she didn't remarry anyone after Umar. Okay, so that's the story, guys, basically, of Hakim. And again, it's a story that we all can benefit from, because it goes to show how we as Muslims should never have such hatred towards a person, because you never know, that person you hate may end up becoming Muslim, and you have to love them. You have to accept them. She became a warrior of Islam. She spent the rest of her life defending Islam and helping to spread it throughout the world. She and all her ex-husbands made up for any ill that they may have done before Islam. So it's something that you and I need to ponder when Shaitan tries to take us to that dark place. A lot of you sisters complain to me about how you think that your sins are so bad that, Allah will never forgive you of the sins that you've done when you were younger, or the mistakes you made when you were younger. Well, her story is a lesson, to always have hope that Allah's mercy supersedes his wrath. Okay, I'm going to stop right here. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Are there any questions about Hakim, one of my favorites? She was a warrior like all those women were. As you guys can see, I've covered about 20 I've covered over what, 20 different female companions? They were all warriors. Back in those days, only the strong survived. Like I told you, the women were trained to fight. Hold on for 1 second. Oh, walaikum salam, Dr. Ali. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. If you want to send me a text with like how you want me to include Sunnah followers like on the flyer, please do so. And then inshallah, regarding, so it's going to be on Saturday, March the 9th is going to be the Philistine program. And so it's just like the times we talked about, it'll be 11:30 Pacific and 2:30 Eastern, inshallah.
Okay.
I've already got the Zoom link and everything all set up. It can hold 500 people.
Okay.
And so I will, so that everybody can just jump on that, and I'll have the, I'll be able to see questions there.
Okay.
And then for the day after, I'm going to do, so I was going to do something in the masjid, which is like a Ramadan workshop.
Okay.
And part of that is going to cover the subject you wanted to talk about, which is, medication. So if you'd like to like be part of that as well, that's great. I'll put you guys on that flyer as well, and then I'll send you the details of that. That'll be a little bit later. It'll be because it'll be like 1:30 Pacific, so that will be 4:30 Eastern.
Okay.
And but if you want something that's just dedicated for you guys on just that subject, which is it'll be a much shorter thing, then just let me know, and I'll be happy to do that as a separate program too.
Yeah, put me on both. That's both of them is good. 4:30 is a great time for us. That's great. Okay, so I'm just gonna text you when I get through with this. I'm gonna text you what to put on for Sunnah followers, and inshallah, I'm looking forward to this.
Inshallah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Assalamu alaikum.
Thanks.
Okay, guys, remind me to do that. I wrote it down. Fame, you in here? Remind me to get that together to do this after this class. March 9th, y'all put that down. It's the 9th and the 10th. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, 9th and 10th for Dr. Ali's thing. Okay. Are there any questions, guys, about Hakim? Any questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to close out because I need to do this now while I got my mind on it. I need to send him the text. Okay, I'm going to close out, and inshallah, don't forget tomorrow at 6 p.m. My cousin Mukhtar is going to do the Caliphate of Abu Bakr since he wasn't able to do it today. So he's going to take my 6 o'clock class tomorrow. And then we have Sheikh Saud at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. Okay, so let me close out so I can work on this with Dr. Ali. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta